call Jamie Lee Ross.
I move that the question be now put.
I call Larissa Wall.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to contribute to this debate. I actually want to start by quoting from the Prime Minister's press release, and it's titled "Supporting Children in Hardship, Focus of this Budget." What I want to highlight, Mr Speaker, is that currently we have 4,808 families on a Housing New Zealand waiting list. These are families who have been through the Ministry of Social Development process. They have been identified as those most in need, and in fact Priority A are defined as people who are at risk and include families with a severe and persistent housing need that must be addressed immediately. We're actually talking about 10,000 children that currently don't have a home. And I think that the question everybody should be asking is, how does this piece of legislation contribute to housing those children? So the Minister's here. I'd love to hear from her. How does this piece of legislation help 10,000 New Zealand children who currently do not have a home, who have been through the Ministry of Social Development process and they have been deemed to be in severe and persistent need of housing? How does this piece of legislation, prioritised by this government, meet the needs of those children? When I look at where this piece of legislation came from, actually it came from a government commissioned report called A Vision for Social Housing. It was commissioned in 2010, and the central proposition of this piece of commissioned research was, number one, private sector organisations could more creatively than government provide social housing to those most in need. And the second proposition was that there needed to be a plan to move people from renting to owning their own homes. Again, I ask the question, how does this piece of legislation contribute to those, I guess, two crucial outcomes from that commissioned report? Because what we know from the social housing provider sector is that actually social housing providers don't want the transfer of houses, because for them the transfer of Housing New Zealand houses is a transfer of responsibility. And so I want to quote Major Campbell Roberts, who said he does not believe, quote, the lives of tenants would be sufficiently improved by such a transfer. And why is that? It's because to take responsibility for a home means to make sure that home is warm, is dry, and is going to contribute to the health and well-being of the family that's living in it. And the reality of a lot of the houses is that they aren't fit for purpose, and actually this government, who are supposed to provide for those most in need, should ensure that the houses that are being provided for those most in need are fit for purpose. And so the private sector organisations that this government wanted to transfer that responsibility to actually at the end of the day said, no thank you. We think it's a core government responsibility to provide housing for those most in need and to ensure the 10,000 New Zealand children who are waiting with their families on Priority A and B housing lists that the Ministry of Social Development have determined for themselves get a home that they need. And why is it important for our children to have a home? Well, actually, it's relevant to their education. If children don't have a home, how are they supposed to have continuous education? How are they supposed to go to an early childhood education provider, which we all know is the basis of getting a good education in our country? How are they then supposed to go to a primary school and to reap the benefit of our public education system? How are then they supposed to belong to a family where mum and dad have security of tenure in the home that they want to build for their children, so that they can go and get further education themselves or possibly go to work? How is that supposed to happen when we have a government at the moment that wants to abdicate responsibility for providing houses and homes for those most in need? I'm an MP in South Auckland, And actually, across the South Auckland area, of the 2,537 families waiting on the Housing New Zealand Ministry of Social Development waiting list, we have 1,070 families and over 2,500 South Auckland children that do not have a home. 40% of the people on this waiting list are Māori. So how is this piece of legislation ensuring that our Māori children have a home and are able to get quality early childhood education and able to go to school? 19% of the families and children on the Housing New Zealand Ministry of Social Development waiting list are Pacific children and families. How is this bill going to contribute to meeting the Better Public Services target? We know we've got big issues with Māori and Pacific children. This government wants to focus on participation. Mr. Chair,
Julian Genter.